Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I'm Katie and welcome to another Bookish adventure. First of all, I want to apologise, but my neighbour's kids are playing outside in the garden and they are being so ridiculously loud. I've been hanging on and waiting and right now this is the quietest they've been in a while, so fingers crossed, but I apologise now for what may ensue. So as we are in this current weird and strange situation, a lot of us are finding ourselves with some extra time on our hands. I am not one of those people. I am still working, so there is not any extra time for me to sit at home and read and binge watch Netflix till my heart is content. However, I did want to do a video recommending some of my favourite books and maybe giving you some options about what you could read. So I'm going to get this first one out of the way because it is an obvious choice and it is Harry Potter. Who doesn't love Harry Potter? If you've never read it, maybe it's time to give it a go. My biggest advice to anyone right now is read something you love or reread something you love, whether it is a genre, whether it is a book, just whatever. Read or reread something you love. So I reread Harry Potter probably maybe 3 years ago. I'm terrible with time, and it was the first time I had reread them ever, and the first time I'd read them since probably the films and reading them. And you know, when I started them I was maybe early teens, that kind of hitting age, and then by the time I finished I was like 15, and rereading them as an adult, it was just so different. It was just so different. I appreciated so much more. You just gain so much knowledge. As a kid, I just didn't understand the stuff with the Ministry. I wanted the stuff at Hogwarts. I wanted the magic. I wanted all the other plot that was happening with Voldemort. I just didn't get the Ministry stuff, but as an adult, oh my god, so much more appreciation. It is wonderful going back to that world because it does begin just so magical, and then suddenly you get the oh okay, there is a darker plot of it, and by the time you get to the end you haven't even noticed. It is just done so amazingly. Sticking to the magic route, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstein. Oh my goodness, this book was recommended to me by a lot of books by my friend Alice, and it is just amazing. It is just so beautiful. I still need to read The Starless Sea, which she's recently released. It has been a long time. So The Night Circus is based around two wizards and their guardians decide to put to test the age-old question: who is the best wielder of magic? Someone who is born with magic or someone who learns? So neither of them know each other's competitors. They don't know who they are, and in this traveling circus, tents are built and made, and it's kind of like they're sending like each other little love notes to each other. It's just really sweet because the time and the love and the craft that they put into the tents are just amazing. The descriptions are everything. Not to mention the circus itself is just this magical entity. You just want to be there. There's nothing like it. And this book takes place in different timelines going back and forth, and you follow the main characters, you follow people who are following the circus on the outside world, and they spot each other by wearing like a red scarf, and it's just stuff like that. And you go back to when the concept of the circus was first begun, you go back to when it's being built. It is just so amazing and magical, and it's them two kind of trying to figure each other out, and you know, they obviously know each other within the circus, but they don't know each other. It's just so good. Continuing with that kind of magical and fantasy feel, read Neil Gaiman. He is one of my favorite authors, and I binge read a lot of his stuff in a very short space of time. For me, there is just an option for everyone, really. His books are amazing. Even his children's books are just so damn scary and creepy and weird, especially the ones illustrated by Chris Riddle. The Graveyard Book and Coraline are so creepy, and they're so good. Like, they're children's books, but they are also adult. I mean, if you've seen Coraline, you know that film is just what? And his books are wonderful. Stardust is another amazing one for a film that is so amazing and big. I remember the first time I ever read Stardust. It's that big, it's tiny, it's so small. I was like, how is this amazing magical world contained in this book? To me, it was just utterly insane. And one of the other things that I like about Neil Gaiman is that he has our everyday world plus this magical realm that we don't know. So you have that with Stardust, where, you know, across the wall is all this magic, and it is the same with like Good Omens. There are gods wandering around trying to vying for not the attention of humanity, but that power struggle of the old gods versus the new ones, like media. So it's that amazing world of just all this is out there and we don't know. The same with Neverwhere. Oh my goodness, that is another one that I love. Neverwhere, where you have the underground of London, like the underground, which is just this magical place that we're just walking above. And the same with Good Omens, which he did with Terry Pratchett. If you've seen the Prime series, just again, it is amazing. That humor, it is just wonderful escapism, and right now that is what we need. So again, going on that route of fantasy, whether you want to go full on high magic wielding fantasy, like something like Throne of Glass, which is that mix of battle fantasy plus magic wielding with fae, or you could do something something like Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Lani Taylor, and again, that is set in Prague, but we learn about this other world where there are creatures and gods. Like, oh, it's just, I mean, it's everywhere. I love it. Or if you want to go down the route of doing that magical or fantasy vibe, but you want something inspired by another culture, another mythology, then go with Rebel of the Sands. It's jinns and genies and their impact on the people. Sorry, I get really paranoid because my neighbor's bathroom, I can see like their window, and sometimes when it's open, there's like this weird black shadow. It's a plant, and sometimes I get really worried it's my neighbor just sitting in their window going, oh my god, what is she doing? And I just get really paranoid every so often. Minor sidetrack there. One of my all-time favorite series, which I will talk about till the day I die, is the Half Bad trilogy by Sally Green. This is like Harry Potter but for grown-ups. There's only 3 books, and I recently got my best friend to read them. She's been in a massive slump, and I was like, read these, they'll tear your heart out, they're amazing. And yeah, she sent me messages like, why would you do this to me? She was like, life isn't fair. And I was like, oh good, you're crying. So this book is based around a guy named Nathan, and we have black and white witches, and that refers to their different kinds of magic, and white witches are superior. Now Nathan, he is born of a black and white magic wielders, and his father is pretty notorious, and he is one of a kind. So he spends a lot of his upbringing going to and from government buildings, being like sort of pretty much experimented on, and he's just a rough childhood, and most of his family, they get him, they love him, and they want to protect him. Couple don't, and it is just this fraught world where they live in, where they don't really trust him. And the older he gets, he kind of lives in captivity with a guardian. He is allowed to run around and exercise, and he has hobbies where he can draw, and basically it is just the story of Nathan. It is just the story of Nathan, really. It is the wider and bigger plot is obviously the ultimate fight between black and white magic wielders and sort of trying to overthrow this government. But more than that, it is Nathan's journey with, he doesn't know how to do people, he doesn't trust people, he doesn't talk to people, and he meets a very few people who he does kind of gain trust with and talk with, like Gabriel, and everything is heartbreaking and everything is wonderful. And the last book just tore me to shreds. I mean, I let my other friend Trish borrow it, and when I got it back, I stupidly read the end chapters again and started crying because I was like, I remember now. Sally Green is just so underrated, and I love her so much. Another favorite, and if you like fairy tales, then you may well like The Lunar Chronicles by Melissa Meyer. I love this because I love fairy tale retellings, but this is fairy tale retellings on like acid. Like, we go to space, like there are androids involved, there is just everything you can imagine. So like Cinderella in it, Cinder, she has a prosthetic foot, but it's not just a prosthetic foot, it is a mechanical limb. Oh my goodness, just so much about it. And it's one of these ones where different characters all come together, so they each have their own books, but they are slowly coming together. People live on the moon. It is just so cool. It's one of my favorite ones, and it was one of the books that for the first time in a long time had me gasping or laughing. And the bit when Cinder falls at the ball and she loses her shoe, I wanted to cry for her. I wanted to reach out and hug her, and it was a very long time since I'd ever had a reaction quite so physical as that, and that book gave it to me. Now of course you have that sort of that fantasy taking you out of that world of today, and there is a lot to choose from right now. However, you might want to go down the route of, let's go down the classics, let's go for what made the books that we have today. So one of my favorites is Frankenstein and Dracula, actually, and Alice in Wonderland. Okay, we can be here up. I love those books. I love them so much. The amount of adaptations that there is just so many amazing branches that you can go from those books, and reading the originals, you just see where it all just came from. And Frankenstein is just so sad. I've seen so many adaptations of it, whether like theatre or ballet, and it's just so good. I'm gonna reread Dracula sort of autumn winter time because it's been a long time, and it's one of my favorites. But again, you've also got the route of like fantasy classics like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Like, if you've been thinking, oh my god, that's a full-on book, and been putting it off, you have the time now to dedicate to it. For the longest time I put off Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. The films were just, I've never really been into high fantasy. Like, to watch, I absolutely love it, but I've always been slightly intimidated by it, and I plucked up the courage and I did it, and I'm so glad I did, because I'm just so glad that I can finally say I've read them, and I would happily reread them. Now you've got your classic literature. Maybe you want to go on the route of, I like this stuff and I do like classic stuff, but however, I also kind of want to learn stuff. So obviously you could do historical fiction. I do like historical fiction and I really need to branch out more. But right now I have been loving Stephen Fry's Mythos collection, which is amazing. So I love Greek mythology, I love Norse mythology, which I'm really looking forward to reading Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. And it is basically bringing the Greek gods and myths and stories to us in a way that is readable, and because there are so many stories and there's so much information. So the first book, Mythos, focuses on the gods, and it focused on where they came from, the creation of the world, the towns, the people who get influenced by them, just like so much. And then the second book, Heroes, which I'm planning to read soon, is obviously about the heroes. So Jason and Hercules and Achilles. I think Achilles is in it. I'm pretty sure Achilles might be in it. I could be wrong. Achilles might not be in it. But anyway, it is based on their story. So you're obviously going to have also the foes that they fight who aren't really mentioned in the Mythos book, which is also kind of making me really hopeful that he's going to do a third one, which is going to be dedicated to like bad guys and the monsters and stuff. And it's so cool because it is written as a story, and as I read the first one I kept forgetting that, like I kept confusing fact with fiction. It was one of those moments where I was like, no, these are the stories but they're not real. Like it's one of those weird things because obviously towns get their name and places and cities got their names from these gods, and it's trying to find that line of what is real and what's not, which is I really love it. Plus Stephen Fry is just awesome. So finally, I promise I'm wrapping this up soon because I'm getting really excited. Find a guilty pleasure. Whether you already have a guilty pleasure, maybe you want to branch out into a new genre, now is the time. For me, my guilty pleasure is Dan Brown. I love his Robert Langdon series, so Angels and Demons, The Da Vinci Code, Origin. Oh my goodness, I love those books because they are the polar opposite of what I read, of what I love, what I read on my everyday. I remember when I read The Da Vinci Code for the first time, I had seen the film and I'd gone to my dad's and I'd read all the books that I had. I was quite young at the time, I think sort of early teens, I think possibly maybe mid. I'd read all my books and I had 2 more days left to his, and I was like, so what are you reading? And he was like, oh, Da Vinci Code, saw the film, liked it when I read it. And I was like, well, that's mine now. And in 2 days I got halfway through that book. I like plowed my way through, and for someone who like of my age at the time, that was a lot. It's like the size I have is like, it's that big, it's short but it's stout, and it just sparked like such a different love of book for me because I love history, I love art, and this just kindled a whole different love for me because growing up I watched films like James Bond and Batman, so I have been always into like suspense and thrillers, like just from a very young age. That has just been something I've always watched. I mean, my favourite film growing up as a kid was like Die Hard, so the sort of the action and the fast pace and all that is something I love, and that is something that book gives me. You have multiple point of views, very short chapters, you're constantly going to and froing. There is so much information and characters are finding out some things, you never know who you can trust. Some characters have turned out to be the same characters as others, and it's just been so good. And I love history, it doesn't matter what it is, and yes, it's probably not real, we know this, but it's just that idea and it's just so cool. And I'm not massively big into conspiracies. Like if someone like wants to tell me their theory and stuff, I will so listen to it and I will give it its credence and whatever, but that's not like my remit, that's not my thing. But as something to watch and to read, it is so interesting because there is so much you can go from. I mean, one of the books which is based about the Masons, I know nothing about the Freemasons, like there is like, that's one of the things I don't know about. So for me that was such an interesting book to read about. It's totally my guilty pleasure because I don't read anything else like it, and when I get one of them I just devour it. I have been thinking for a long time about reading his other books which are just standalones because I love Robert Langdon series so much. My friend said it's very similar in the fast paced and the way it's set up, but obviously it is different because I love the history and the art aspect of it. Like I'm constantly whilst I'm reading it googling what like buildings look like or pictures look like and artwork just to see how it fits in with the stories. Like it's just a book that like sparks just so much love. I mean, you can probably tell from the way I'm gushing. I mean, if you ever saw my Origin book review, a lot of screaming was involved. Wow, okay, that went on a little bit longer than I hoped, so I am so sorry, but once I got going then, oh my god, just remembering why I love these books was just, so I hope I have given you some ideas, and maybe I've given you something completely different that you wouldn't normally think about reading. This is why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to share with you some of my favourite books out there, and also why I love them, and just yeah, if you enjoyed this video then smash that like button. As always, leave comments below, give me some recommendations. If you're new, hit the subscribe button and ding the bell. I will see you next Thursday for a weekly reading vlog. Stay safe out there.